Oh, that's real good.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the 1111 podcast. I'm Matthew.
I'm Simone.
And I'm Donnie.
And we're the T10 Collective. And we're here for another exciting episode with the team where we're going to dive into some of the day-to-day stuff that we all as entrepreneurs deal with. And excited today to be able to talk to y'all, as the seasons are changing, as so much has happened throughout the year. Excited for us to be able to go deep on some of the stuff that we've been going through and hopefully be able to relate to a lot of what y'all have been going through.
Yes. So where do we start, y'all? I mean, I feel like right now, we're in a season of growth. We've been in a season of growth as a team. And right now, I think it's all about kind of finding our audience and finding that true support so we can build community. But I feel like this is something that all entrepreneurs go through, especially on social. I know we're putting out email newsletters and things like that and just trying to find your tribe. So let's just talk about ways that, we're doing that actively and kind of the real of, sometimes the people that you think are supporting you just aren't going to be there to support and kind of bring your ideas through. And sometimes it is, those people that follow you on social or come across your email newsletter and things like that.
Yeah, there's been so much change, not only over the last year, but just also along this journey. I think just the things that when we were just starting out, it's crazy to say that we've almost been in business almost 6 years in a few weeks. But the things that we thought were just consistent when we were getting started, you can't lean on those things anymore because those people and the way that business is just done, it just doesn't necessarily exist in as consistent as it was then. And so I think, like you said, we've been trying to, so to speak, throw things at the wall and see what sticks. And sometimes it don't even stick that long, but being able to constantly have a feedback loop where you're paying attention, we always looking at our metrics, always being willing to try new things out, but also paying attention to what's going on around us and not kind of being in an echo chamber where we think just because we know, if we do an episode this day and we have a conversation this day, it worked last time, let's just do it. Being able to look like, all right, man, like, maybe we got to try to switch it up a little bit. And I think we've been good about that, but it ain't easy because the metrics that we're looking at sometimes will tell you something completely different than even what you were expecting.
Yeah. And I think when entrepreneurs and just in general kind of try to follow a certain tactic or a certain strategy too much to the T, you end up putting yourself in a box because you're not throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks. You're just sticking to one thing. So you don't know, okay, maybe my audience wants to see this side of me or hear this side of me. So I think that's an important point as far as like just putting things out there, really.
And you touched on a good one because I think measuring and looking at metrics are important, but it's also making sure you're focusing on the right ones. And sometimes that always doesn't tell the story. So I think having the discipline to create the proper feedback loops, analyzing the information, but then also understanding that you have to test, right? So whether it's A/B testing things or dedicating enough time to getting feedback and then also understanding what the right threshold is before you can say that this is a real insight I need to act on. Because a one conversation doesn't justify a pivot, but you also have to be aware enough to see, okay, if this is happening multiple times, if I'm hearing the same thing, how can I build that into whatever I'm doing? I think is important as well.
Yeah, and then being open to like feedback and like because I feel like as entrepreneurs, we get so attached to like our work and like what we're putting out there that sometimes
sensitive a little bit.
Yeah, word to Erica, we sensitive about our shit. So, sometimes it's like, okay, I hear feedback, but I still want to keep doing it a certain way, or I don't want to switch up and kind of change. What would you say to the entrepreneur that's like hesitant right now about stepping into change?
It's a hard balance because I do think there's so many talking heads out there that tell you like stick through it, like be resilient. And on one end, like, yes, that's important. You do need to be resilient. And so sometimes you don't necessarily want to abandon something too soon without seeing it all the way through. But also your time is valuable. The effort that you're putting in is valuable. And so being able to try something enough that you're like, all right, here's some smaller changes that I could make, as opposed to throwing the whole thing out and just starting fresh.
That's a fact. And I think, yeah, it's a balance, right? I think you could, with so much information overload, you can have a tendency to seek things that are affirming to what you're doing, which is the antithesis of being able to grow and adapt. So I think it's important to be open to feedback, being self-reflective, and then also leaning in on conversation. I think there can be a natural ability to want to kind of lean into your idea and work within tunnel vision. But it's okay to ask or even bounce your idea off of folks. I think a lot of people sometimes keep their concept close to their chest because they don't want anybody stealing it, or they don't want anybody to potentially leverage it or use it. But the reality is, if it's something you're passionate about and you're destined to do it, getting that feedback's helpful. So that's something I've struggled with, but I'm trying to be do a better job of is, hey, I've been really ideating on this idea, but I can't figure this piece out. What do you think? And you'll be surprised, just like having those conversations, you'll walk away with like, man, I've never thought about that. And folks are very willing to share and bounce ideas of and be cool with it, because ultimately, people within your community want you to grow. So I think being open to bouncing your ideas off with other folks. Now, not everything, of course, right? But definitely being open for feedback with folks that you really value their insight and opinion from is key.
But Simone, you also brought up something interesting in the beginning where, yes, your core circle is important to be able to lean on them, but now we're in the digital age, the social media age, where who those people are, your network is so much bigger and your feedback loop is so much bigger than you would have even thought before. So there's people that you may even only know digitally, that they're a part of your community and you interact with each other's content. You may send a DM or a comment back here and there, but then those are also people that we can't be resistive to asking for feedback or being able to put ourselves out there and embrace them, because the reality is, in order to be able to grow, we have to look beyond the people that we can see right in front of us. And, social media is a great way to do that.
Yeah, social media is a great way to do that. I know that happens so much. Like, people are like, oh, that's my social media friend. Like, we started off on social media and now, actually have turned things into a friendship. But I know it's hard, especially for our community, to kind of open up to each other and help each other. And I want to talk about that a little bit, because sometimes we have to look outward to kind of push ourselves forward. And sometimes the support just isn't there. So what do you do, like, when, you don't get that same support from your own community at times?
Yeah, I think it's, for me, I have a tendency to not place expectations. Right? So for me, the letdowns don't necessarily surprise me, and that's maybe not a cynical way of looking at it, but I think for me, I proceed in ways in which I don't place an expectation, but it's challenging. I think the best thing to do is just continue to kind of stay true to what you are and what your views and principles are. So I think, personally, I think we collectively share that we're not turning down opportunities to network, support, or build in any ways. And I believe in karma and all those type of things. So as long as you continue to when someone hits you up, hey, I definitely have time to chat, let's bounce ideas off, it's going to come back around in some way. And also, I just enjoy the opportunities to help and support and build in any ways. And that's one thing I'm definitely focusing on in the next year, is trying to be more involved in being out there, mentoring, pro bono things, but just trying to be more accessible and willing to offer where I can. Because sometimes you often kind of devalue your experience, and just because you're like, oh well, I want to get here first. But even in just the experiences you have, there's someone that could definitely benefit from the lessons, the roads that you've gone through. So just putting positive energy out, I think, at all times is important.
Yeah, and I agree, and I agree with what you said in the beginning also, but I think it's also not expecting perfection from imperfect people. At the end of the day, like, regardless of if someone's a hero to you or someone that you just value their perspective, they're not always going to necessarily see in something that you're putting out what you see in it. And so not necessarily expecting them to just be with you 100% and have your back in the way that you want it, because at the end of the day, people can only kind of see through the own lens that they have. And so being able to pick and choose the positive and even some of the negative from a person, and being able to figure out, what do I do with this? If maybe I was expecting them, it's like Jay-Z always said about his uncle. His uncle was his hero to him. And when he played his demo tape to his uncle basically like shunned him. And if he had let his uncle shun him and his dream, we never would have the Jay-Z that we know. So I think similarly, being able to take feedback from somebody that you look up to, or someone that you're expecting something from, and be able to figure out, how can I use this in a way that can help me get better?
Yeah, I think it all comes down to mindset and, like you said, perspective. Because I think that, well, I know I have, even especially with family, like sharing your dreams or sharing. I mean, no lie, y'all. Not too long ago, I told y'all know I live in Maryland. These fine gentlemen live here in New York. But one day I want to, at least if it's just for like a year, I'm like, I want to move to New York. One of my family members literally said, "Oh, I'm gonna pray that don't happen." Don't pray against.
Not praying against it.
Don't pray
I don't think
against
prayer works
my
like
dream.
that.
That's crazy. But it's that it was an old elder.
Yeah.
And they're set in their ways, and sometimes they just don't see what you see. But like you said, it's all in the mindset. Like, okay, that's fine. Like, you go ahead and say that, but I know what's coming for me, and how I can push through.
Let me ask you, does that make you want to do it even more now?
Even more. It does.
It lights a fire.
Yeah, it definitely lights a fire. And I think I've always been that person that's like, I think you have to be as an entrepreneur, because people are always going to try to like shit on your dreams a little bit, or just put like their insecurities on you, and you have to allow that to kind of fuel you forward, because if you're not motivated or not disciplined, nobody else is going to be.
That's a fact.
And be able to support you. So you have to have that mindset for yourself.
And I also do think the personality, like you said, the personality trait, I know for me for sure, like, it's weird. I always realize that I thrive more on someone's negative opinion of me than the love. I always, if someone says I can't do something or is skeptical about it, that same drive, if it was my family member, I was like, oh, all right, bet. Not only am I gonna go there, but I'm gonna really kill it. So just not necessarily to prove it to you, but to be able to prove that like that narrative wasn't gonna stop me.
It's interesting though, because I battle with this too, right? You have elders in your family that give feedback, and I do think it's important to have that connection of generations, because there's wisdom that could be passed down, but you almost have to be able to, I can't pronounce this word well,
compartmentalize.
You have to be able to do that.
Spell it.
Yeah. You ain't gonna get me doing that. You have to be able to kind of do that, because naturally with your parents, and we have Caribbean backgrounds, it can be very traditional what they want you to do. And so when ideas of doing things that are not as traditional come up, you have to be able to take that feedback and understand where it's coming from. And I tend to, maybe to a fault at times, see the better in everything. So I try to give grace where I can there. But trust me, it's something that's a consistent battle. Don't worry, we're going to get you here.
And we also can't live out other people's dreams though. And I think that that's something for us, especially as people of color and Black people specifically. I think a lot of the previous generations, they have a mindset in terms of the things that they were able to accomplish and the sacrifices that they've made to help us get to the position that we have. And so there's almost this unspoken of expectation that we have to be able to live out their version of that dream. So sometimes, just like you were saying in that example, being able to not let the limitations of their perspective limit your capacity. Because at the end of the day, we have our own dreams, but if you live within the confines of what they think you're going to be,
man,
bruh, you're going to be unhappy.
This started early for me. My dad at one point, he's like, oh yeah, you're just going to go be an engineer. Like, my aunt was an engineer, and then my grandma, she was like trying to push this, like, go work at NASA. And I'm like, y'all, do I give NASA? Like, I just don't think that that's in my trajectory. So, but it started early, and it's like, you have to take those expectations off of people and not limit yourself.
That's a fact. It's interesting. I mean, now as a parent too, it's interesting to just kind of see how even my kids, their interests in all three are different. And I definitely got a NASA in my tribe. I got a NASA, but then I have one that's like completely, I don't know where it could go.
Yeah.
It could go,
I know the way
it
you're
go
talking
anyway.
about.
So it's like it's interesting. You just gotta give people grace, and I think it's also lessons learned, right? Because taking the experiences of my childhood and how that might have influenced my career paths, I'm definitely trying to give a little more space and grace for them to find their way. But it's challenging.
I was about to say, as a parent, I know that's probably difficult because of course, you have this path that you want for your children.
And you're investing in them as well.
Oh yeah, because it's like, we're doing another activity. We're on 5 now,
right?
And then you want to make sure it's like, well, what are we focusing on? But then it's also like you got to give them the space to grow. There's no formula. There's no science. I'm figuring it out day by day. But I do think those lessons of how it impacted my own career journey, going to college and having this picture of corporate America being the only pathway out was something I definitely was ingrained in me. But I always had this interest and drawn to entrepreneurship that I kind of kept pretty reserved. But because of that, right? So I think there's definitely things I could have done differently and experimented and tried more if I hadn't been given that grace earlier. So yeah, just things that kind of influence, and going back to that compartmentalize that you have to do. I mean. So that's all.
And I also think for us, just being uncomfortable with the fact that we're not in control. I mean, you also as a parent, I'm sure there's a frustrating moments where like you want them to be able to see their potential, but you want to be able to give them a container to be able to figure it out. But like that also takes some resistance in yourself of like, let me fight the urge to try to tell them like, nah, this is what you have to do. Because even as business owners ourselves, there's so many things that come naturally to us that we want to be able to just do, but based off of the circumstances, we want people to move a certain way. We want things to unfold a certain way. And we just have to be comfortable with that uncomfortability and that unpredictability, because at the end of the day, nothing about our journey thus far has been linear.
Yeah.
And the reason that we're even sitting here today is because of that. And so like just slowly but surely getting more comfortable with that is a thing that we got to get used to.
Yeah. It's a tough thing for me too, because I'm learning that, but then part of me too is like I definitely gravitate towards structure. So I like, okay, well, is it fitting in a model? Is it going this way? But you also, so there's definitely a balance, because I do think you have to give the freedom and the ebbs and flows to allow it to flow. But then it's like, how do you balance that with the right structure to make sure that all that is still going in a direction that's positive, in the right direction too? So yeah, there's no playbook. There's no playbook.
Yeah.
Do you want your kids to be entrepreneurial?
I do. I think I want them to do whatever is in their passion and what they're interested in. So I'm not going to over encourage it, but I'm going to give them exposure to everything and see what they gravitate toward fall. Because it's not, it's not for everybody. I do think it's important to develop a skill set to do something you're passionate about and in, but wherever that may fall out is where it may fall out. So I definitely want to expose them to it. It's interesting because though I was pushed in a path of corporate America, I had family members that are entrepreneurial, but it wasn't necessarily something that was overly talked about as a path, right? Probably likely as I reflect, because it's not easy. So yeah, for me, exposure, testing it's nothing to try to do something on your own, but I'm gonna let them make their own decisions, and I'm just gonna be able to be there to guide and support where I can. So
yeah, I feel like by the time I have kids, everybody gonna be an entrepreneur. Like
probably.
So I know that the conversation is probably going to change. Sure. And more entrepreneurs will surround the children to inspire them to want to go off and do their own things. I mean, even now, I feel like all of like the Gen Zers, they're like head on into entrepreneurship. Yeah. And I think it's going to take them time to learn, like, okay, it does take time. It does have to be some type of structure. Yeah. But I feel like everybody is going to want to be an entrepreneur.
I got a question. I actually got a question about that. So now that we're in this moment where entrepreneurship and doing your own thing, whether it's through a side hustle or a full-on venture, is so popular, what can we do? Or what can we do individually or collectively to help them? Because there's so many tools that are needed, and there's so many gaps that we've experienced, right, in our journey. So what do you think is can be helpful in providing that level of support to them?
Yeah. I feel like we definitely have to make sure like we're in the schools. Like, and
Mhm.
even if it comes down to like building an entrepreneurship class, I actually just mentored a young lady in high school who was a
Dope.
part of an entrepreneurship class in her high school.
Nice.
And during the summer, they paired us up, and we've kind of talked about her business ideas. And at the end of her program, they have to do like a pitch competition. And I think that's a really dope program that
Mhm.
that most of the schools should adopt. Like,
Yeah,
we know we
yeah.
have these kids that want to be entrepreneurial. We want them to thrive in that, but there's no blueprint for it.
Fact.
And so we need to create some type of blueprint for that. And then just get out there and teach them. Like, get into community centers, host programs geared towards the kids who want to be entrepreneurial, host pitch competitions, so they can be a part of that. A lot of it is just, we know a lot of being an entrepreneur is not knowing and figuring things out yourself.
Yep.
Yeah.
And God, would it be so much easier if we literally had programs that we could grow up in and learn these type of skills.
Fact,
So I
yeah.
think it definitely comes down to that. Even like hooking up with like the professors at the universities and going into these classes and teaching what we've learned so far.
Yeah. And I also do think that the irony of it is, I think introducing them to structure.
Yeah.
I think in many and I'm painting it with a broad brush right now, but I do think the younger generation, from what I've seen, a lot of them, yes, it sounds sexy and it sounds cool to be an entrepreneur, and by all means, if anybody wants you to go out there and try something, it's us. But I do think introducing them to like the parameters of structure, to be able to say, yes, you can do that, but in order to really be able to have success, you got to be able to treat it like a job, even though it's your thing. And so introducing them to the structure that, we talked about in other episodes about what corporate America has taught us, I think being able to now have that experience and know that they haven't gotten there yet, be able to introduce those tools to them from now in a more informal capacity, that they can then still be able to do their entrepreneurial thing, whatever it is that they want to do. But now to know, okay, now I have to be able to figure out, how do I write an email if I need to? How do I need exactly that foundation, where if we could introduce that to them, I think it's going to help them go so much further than if they're just figuring it out on their own with the tools that exist right now.
Yeah, I agree completely, because I think it's that even those interactions are so fulfilling, because like I remember when we did the program with Milbank, shout out to Milbank, that we did kind of like a summer program for entrepreneurship for kids. They were mostly teenagers, and it culminated in a pitch competition. And it's just so impressive to see the ideas.
It was so creative.
Yeah, it was so creative, so interesting, and so it's so fulfilling. So I completely agree with both of you. Another question: what was your, I guess, first exposure to entrepreneurship?
Ooh.
Why?
You know what's interesting? The irony is I wasn't exposed to it directly. I was exposed to it through Black Enterprise magazine. So
Okay.
when I was a kid, I was clearly a weird kid, but like I always knew that I wanted to be an entrepreneur, and I used to read Black what's it called? I just said it. Black Enterprise. I used to read it as a kid because like it fascinated me that like there was this, I had heard about Earl Graves. I heard that there was this Black dude that started this thing that like now I could physically see it. And so I was just fascinated to know that like, there's Black dudes out there and Black women out there who are like really doing this at a high level. They even got a magazine where you could read about it. And so it like instilled in me that what entrepreneurship looks like doesn't have to be this like rinky dink thing. We talking about like corporate Fortune 500 level type stuff that one day if you just apply the principles and follow their path, you can get to that level in whatever it is that you want to do.
Yeah, that's dope. Shout out to Black Enterprise.
Shout out to
Yeah.
them.
Yeah. I think for me, I want to even take it back and say that a lot of Black girls experience this, like getting your hair done when you're younger and going to either that hairdresser or that salon, and that person being like the entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Because it's like, oh, you going to Miss Joe to get your hair done today, and it's like, okay. And that, I think that was my first exposure to entrepreneurship. Now, growing up, my dad had a few ventures that he, went off and tried to do. But I think that thinking back, that was like my first being in the hair
That's a great
salon.
one.
Yes.
Yep.
That's a fact. The barbershops and hair salons is so impactful
Yeah.
on your upbringing. I think for me, it was in high school, my senior year, I took I'm not sure if it was just an elective or an AP class, but it was on entrepreneurship. And the final, it was senior year, so you're already enjoying yourself. So though I took it seriously, I wasn't as engaged especially once I got into school. But the final project was you had to like present your business idea. Mm-hmm. So I think when you could find what you're gravitating towards, and this is a conversation we had a little earlier, it's like what you tend to like to go deep into, right? What others might find tedious, you tend to like adapt to. And I think for this presentation, my idea was a bed and breakfast in a college town.
No.
And I
so mature.
And I know, right? How old am I, right? Because at that, bed and breakfast in a college town. I know, yeah. So, I made the presentation, but then, and this is, I'm a little older, right? So too, it's like there wasn't like you can make sites, but I think Microsoft had this thing where you can make like a shell of like a template of a site.
Mm-hmm.
I shout out to the DOE because my mother worked in one, so I always had an extra laptop in New York City Public School, and then so I made it in this program. Had the whole things designed and everything, and I was the only kid who like went that far.
Oh wow!
Yeah, so I remember having such fulfillment in that project, and then creating kind of the business plan, writing it out. I really need to go look at it, but that was my first exposure. A ton of fun.
Dope.
Yeah, a ton of fun.
Really
so
dope, man. Team, I always enjoy these episodes, man, because we learn so much about each other. But here we are, episode number 10.
Yes.
Like we've come so far in this, even just this journey right here. I'm really excited about the future for us, and just really grateful for all of y'all at home that listen and watch our episodes to keep us going and giving us the constant feedback to continue on our journey, and being with us on this ride as we figure out where it takes us all. But we've come to another end of another episode. Thank you again, and we can't wait to chop it up with you again soon. Peace.
Yo.